Children, and welcome to Yupp Master, our foundation courses. Now, we have begun the biology session and we have started with the chapter of the transport system, right? If you remember, until now, we have learned all about the circulating fluid, which is blood. We have also covered about the circulating fluid, which was called as lymph, alright? We also studied about the structures of the heart, the internal, the external structure as well. Today, let us start with the circulation happening in different animals. Actually, what is the way that all the nutrients, the oxygen is being circulated in different animals. Alright, so let's begin with this topic of the circulatory system in various animals. Now, when we're speaking about various animals, remember what we will do is we will go according to the different phylums which are involved. Alright, so when we talk about circulatory system in various animals, we begin with the most primitive, the most initial type of animal, which is the unicellular animal. Could be, we can talk about the unicellular amoeba, okay? So, and even the unicellular animals like the paramecium. What do we see over here? We see that in these animals which are unicellular, the circulation is taking place by movement of the cytoplasm. So basically what happens here is the cytoplasm is constantly moving inside the body of that organism, and that's why we call it as a streaming cytoplasmic movement. Alright, so this, what happens here, the cytoplasm is constantly moving inside the body of that organism, which is going to help those nutrients and the oxygen to circulate all around the cell, so that each and every part of that cell receives the required nutrition. Alright, now, so in this phylum, that is protozoa, this streaming cytoplasmic movement, there can be another name for it too, and that other name is called as cyclosis. So when you hear this word cyclosis, it is nothing but the streaming cytoplasmic movement of these animals. Alright, now let's continue coming back to our slides. Okay, now the next animals that we are going to be talking about would be those of the sponges. Okay, sponges belong to the phylum which we call as poriferans, right? Now, what is the circulatory system happening in a sponge? Well, sponges are all just cells being put together. Okay, now in all these cells which have been put together, how does circulation happen amongst them? Well, what basically happens is, you know that poriferans, pori means pores, okay, this word pori over here, it means pores, okay, and these are the animals which have pores on their body wall, okay. So now what is happening with these pores? With the help of these pores, water can go inside through these pores. Can you see in the diagram that I am drawing these arrows, and the direction which I am drawing the arrows, that is the direction through which water is able to enter into this sponge, okay. Now these small openings that we have here, those small openings are called as ostia, okay. So through these ostia, water is able to enter inside the body of the sponge. Then water passes through the canal that's there inside, okay. It is a hollow space, and that hollow space inside is called as the spongocoel. It's called as the spongocoel, okay. So it is the cavity or the coelom of that sponge, okay. So the spongocoel, and then water is going to be pushed out through this one external opening in the top, and that external opening is what we call as the osculum, okay. You call it as the osculum. Alright, so water enters in through minute pores called as ostia. Water passes through that cavity called as the spongocoel, and then water comes out through that one major opening which we call as the osculum. This is called as the water canal system in the poriferans, alright, and this is, since the circulation happening here is outside the cells, hence we can call this as an extracellular circulation happening in which phylum? In the phylum poriferans, alright. Now, after porifera comes the next phylum, and that next phylum is called as coelenterata. Coelenterata can also be called as phylum Cnidaria, okay. Now, in Cnidaria, which are the animals that we speak about? Coelenterata means animals like hydra, okay, or animals like the jellyfish. Okay, so you have these kind of examples when we're talking about the phylum Coelenterata. How does this take place here? Similarly, there is an extracellular circulation happening even in this phylum of Coelenterata. Alright, so extracellular circulation happens in porifans and also happens in Coelenterata. Okay. Now, what is next phylum? The next phylum would be those of the flatworms. Okay. Now, what is that happening in the flatworms? Flatworms. First of all, look at this word platyhelminthes. Okay. First, let's break up this word. This word helminth, okay, helminth means worm. And when we're talking about the word platy means flat. So, the very first worms that we're speaking about are none other than our flatworms. Okay. Now, in the flatworms, the circulation taking place is inside tissues. Okay. And those are functional tissues. Functional tissues may be called as parenchyma. So, the circulation happening here is just by diffusion inside the tissues, and that's why we call it as the parenchymal circulation. Alright. So, that was for the platyhelminthes. So, there is no fluid involved here. All the circulation taking place is only by the means of diffusion through these tissues. Alright. Next, we come to the other types of worms, and these worms here, again look here, helminth means it is a worm. And which worms are these? These are none other than the roundworms. Okay, so these are the roundworms we're speaking about here. How is the circulation happening here? Again, here also the circulation is an extracellular circulation. Okay, this is done by a fluid which is called as the pseudocoelomic fluid. Now, when we come ahead, we will see that animals have a type of coelom. Okay, some animals don't have coelom at all, to which we will call those animals as an acoelomate animal, where there is no body cavity. Some animals do have a cavity, but they are not the cavity that we require, and that is called as a false body cavity. So, those false body cavities are called as the pseudocoelom. Okay. Now, always remember, most of the times, whenever there is a coelom, that coelom will always be filled with fluid. So, these animals, which are the roundworms, they are also having a coelom, which is called as the pseudocoelom, and that will be filled with a fluid, which we're going to be calling as the pseudocoelomic fluid. Okay, so these animals which have body cavities filled with the pseudocoelomic fluid, well, it is that fluid which is going to behave as the circulating fluid, and it will help in the transport of all the different nutrients and the gases which would be required by that animal. So, even the roundworms, even Aschelminthes, the circulation takes place by pseudocoelomic fluid. Okay. Next, we come to the next phylum, which is that of annelids. Now, when we speak about annelids, which animals are we exactly talking about? The most famous annelid is none other than the earthworm. Okay, the earthworm. So, these animals which are there, they are commonly known as the ringworms. So, we learnt about the flatworms, we learnt about the roundworms, and now we come to the ringworms. In the ringworms, the circulatory system is a closed type. Now, do you remember what we mean by closed type of circulatory system? Well, we had two types of circulatory systems. First, okay, when we talk about the circulatory systems, there were two types. Either it could be an open one or it may be a closed one. Okay, open or closed circulatory system. The open one was where the circulating fluid was spread amongst the whole body cavity. So, basically here the cells, or you can say the organs, were bathing in the fluid. Okay, but when we talk about closed type of circulatory system, over here the circulatory fluid, the circulating fluid that is there, that fluid is basically flowing inside closed vessels. Okay, so here the circulating fluid is found in vessels which are called as The blood vessels, okay, the blood vessels. Okay, so now when we're talking about this worm, this is the very first worm which has got a closed circulatory system. And can you see here, beautifully they have drawn here how the blood is found inside these blood vessels only. Okay, so here are those blood vessels here, and blood is going to be found only inside these blood vessels. Okay, so that's the circulating fluid here. All right, now coming to the next phylum after Annelida comes the arthropods. Okay, arthropods have so many types of animals in them. There are the first initial types of animals which we can call as the insects. Okay, these are the insectas. Okay, then you have the other type of animals which are the crustaceans. Okay, these are the crustaceans. Then you have the spiders which belong to arachnids. Okay, so these are the different types of animals or the different types of classes which are found under the phylum of Arthropoda. Over here, the circulatory system is an open type, which means that the circulating fluid is going to be filled in all the body cavity. Okay, now what is this circulatory system? What is the body cavity over here called as? Because the cavity is filled with the circulating fluid. Remember a word for cavity? It's called as coelom. And for fluid, can I call it as blood or may I call it as heme? Yes. So we see here that the circulating fluid is generally white in color. And remember in our last lecture, lymph is a fluid in our body which is also white in color. That's why the circulating fluid of an animal which has an open circulatory system, we call that fluid as hemolymph. And the cavity in which that fluid is flowing, that cavity is going to be called as hemocoel, seal for coelom. So remember these two important words. When you have an animal or when you have an organism with an open circulatory system, mostly the cavity will be called as hemocoel and the circulating fluid will be called as hemolymph. Alright. Okay. Now, coming to after arthropod, the very next phylum would be that of a molluscans. In the mollusks, again in molluscas, the circulating fluid or the circulatory system in which phylum? Phylum mollusk. Okay. The circulatory system is an open type. Now what's the difference here? There's a very big difference in the respiratory pigment. Means that pigment which is made up of some element and the pigment which is able to hold on to that oxygen. In humans, we have the respiratory pigment called as hemoglobin. Okay, now hemoglobin in our body contains the element called as iron. Okay, now iron is a element which is imparting a red color, and this is the basic reason why our blood is red in color, because hemoglobin are found inside the RBCs. Okay, now talking about the blood of a mollusk, their respiratory pigment which is there, it contains copper, does not contain iron, it contains copper. So because of the presence of copper, copper will always be imparting a slightly bluish color. And because here the color of that pigment is slightly bluish, the blood of a mollusk appears to be bluish in color. Hence, we can call this pigment, instead of hemoglobin, we can call this pigment as hemocyanin. Alright, so hemocyanin is the major oxygen carrier in those animals which belong to the phylum Mollusca. Okay, over here also the blood is going to, or the circulating fluid is going to be spread throughout the whole body cavity. Hence, we're calling this as an open circulatory system. Okay, alright. Now, after this, we come to the next phylum, which is that of Echinodermata. Echinodermata. Echino means spines and derma means skin. Okay, so these are those animals which have got spines on their skin. Alright, in here there is a system which is called as a water vascular system. Okay, also can be called as an ambulacral system. So what happens here basically is that as water enters inside the body of this organism, Okay, there is a canal present everywhere. In fact, the water is going to be circulating through this and radiating through all these arms of the animal. Okay, so as water is flowing inside the body of the animal, it is water that is going to be carrying all the required nourishment and the required oxygen for every part of this animal. Alright, so this is called as a water vascular system or an ambulacral system belonging to the animals of echinodermata. Okay, and you all know very clearly that in the organism of us humans, mammals, we have a 4-chambered heart, and our heart is the major pumping organ, and our major circulating fluid is none other than blood. Okay, so we've done the circulatory system which is seen in various animals. Okay, now what we also like to cover in today's lecture is, along with the circulating fluid, we also are going to be speaking about the circulation happening in our body, which is called as a double circulation. Okay, now in this double circulation, let us see over here, let's see the whole screen over here, how the circulation is basically happening. Okay, look at this here. In the middle we have a heart. Okay, on one side I am going to be writing about the organ, on the other side I am going to be writing about the lungs. Okay, so first of all that's happening is, from the organs of the body, from all the different organs of the body, we see that deoxygenated blood is going to be carried from the organs to the heart. Okay, so deoxygenated blood is being carried from organs to the heart. Now after it enters into the heart is going to take it, that very same blood, heart will be taking it towards the lungs. Now after it reaches the lungs, this very same blood will undergo oxygenation. So at the level of the lungs, oxygen will be provided, and then that blood will become oxygenated blood. Now this oxygenated blood has to be returned back to the heart. So the oxygenated blood from the lungs is going to be carried back to the heart, and from the heart, that very same oxygenated blood is going to be provided to all the organs so that the organs can use up that oxygen. Okay, now can you see how the blood has entered into the heart twice? Okay, so the first time it entered was through this manner, okay, from the organs to the heart. The second time it entered into the heart was from the lungs to the back to the heart. So we see here, that's why we can call this type of circulation as a double circulation. Okay, the circulation happening at the level of the heart and the organs. Okay, I'm talking about this level. This circulatory system happening here is called as the systemic circulation, and the circulation happening between the same heart and the lungs is what we will be calling as the pulmonary circulation. Okay, so I hope this clears the whole concept of what exactly is a double circulation, where one side is between the heart and the organs and the other side is between the heart and the lungs. Since that blood enters into the heart twice, okay, before it reaches the body parts, that's why we are said to be having a double type of circulation. Alright, so this is the whole meaning of double circulation. Okay. Now, after we see that there have been two types of circulatory systems in our body. One was the systemic circulation. Second was the pulmonary circulation. Okay. Now, let's come forward to the next topic, and that next topic is all the events which are associated with one heartbeat. Okay. Now, my next question to you is, what exactly is a heartbeat? Yes, one heartbeat means, the normal, we learnt about heart sounds. We learnt about the first sound, which was called as lup, and we learnt about the second sound, which is called as dup. So lup and dup together is making one heartbeat. Now, if you actually sit for 1 minute, 60 seconds, you sit for 1 minute, and if you want to count what is the heartbeat, what is the heart rate, tell me how much would you get? In 1 minute, how many heartbeats are you going to be able to count? Yes, there would be 72. Yes, So 72 beats in 1 minute. Okay, now what all substance, or rather what all events are associated with one heartbeat? Only one heartbeat. Now remember one thing, when we're talking about 1 minute, okay, in 1 minute there are 72 beats. Okay, 72 beats in 1 minute. So when we're talking about in one beat, okay, how long would that last? That would be lasting for 0.8 seconds. Okay, so the events associated with one heartbeat in our body, all those events are going to be clubbed together, and we call those events as the cardiac cycle. So one cardiac cycle lasts for 0.8 seconds. Okay, so in 1 minute there would be 72 cardiac cycles events happening. Okay, so let us see now that in one cardiac cycle what exactly are the events that are occurring. Okay, now remember one thing, that when we are talking about the human heart, remember that internal structure that we have done. Okay, when we spoke about the internal structure, okay, just a brief diagram of what we had done until now. Okay, let's just draw the human heart first. Okay, first when we're drawing the heart, you have a 4-chambered heart, right? A rough diagram of the human heart. Okay, we have a 4-chambered heart where these here are our chambers. Okay, now from here let us draw first the pulmonary trunk. Okay, so first we drew the pulmonary trunk. All right, after that let us continue by drawing the systemic aorta. All right, all right, so now what do we see? Let's label this and let us see where all how all is blood flowing inside the heart, okay, and outside the heart going to the lungs. Okay, now here are our superior and inferior vena cavas. These are the major blood vessels which are seen. First over here, can I call this as the superior vena cava? Can I call this one as the inferior vena cava? Okay, then next we see that this part here, this is the pulmonary trunk, and lastly the very big blood vessel, the biggest artery, which is called as the aorta. Okay, so now initially how is blood entering into this system? Remember that the deoxygenated blood enters first. And how does deoxygenated blood enter? Deoxygenated blood is entering through the superior vena cava. Okay, also deoxygenated blood enters through the inferior vena cava. All right, and the heart, the deoxygenated blood of the heart itself is coming through the coronary sinus. So basically first in this atrium, which atrium is this? Remember the markings, this is the right side of the heart and this is the left side of the heart. So we see here first deoxygenated blood is going to collect inside the right atrium. Okay, then it will pass through the valve over here. Remember which valve was present here? There was a tricuspid valve present here, and then that deoxygenated blood will get filled into this ventricle over here. Okay, then from this ventricle, this very same blood will enter into the pulmonary trunk, and once it enters into the pulmonary trunk, it is going to be taken towards the lungs. So it enters into the pulmonary arteries over here, and through these pulmonary arteries that blood will be taken and given at the level of the lungs. Okay, now what happens at the level of the lungs? That blood will become oxygenated, and the oxygenated blood is going to be returning to the heart through the 4 pulmonary veins. Where does it return? It returns back to the heart at the level of this left atrium and it collects over here. Okay, now from this part here, that blood has to enter back into the ventricles through the bicuspid valve, and then through the bicuspid valve, the blood will enter into this chamber here. Which chamber is this? This is the left ventricle. Now, from the left ventricle, this oxygenated blood which has been collected here has to be given to all the different parts of the body. So, from here, it will be flowing inside the aorta, okay, inside the aorta, and this aorta is going to take it to all the different parts of the body, okay. So, it will take it to all the different parts of the body. So, now, if I am going to sit and count which are the, or rather put in a sequence, in a sequential order, what are the events that happen first? Initially, what is happening? The blood is going to go from atria to the ventricles. Now, my next question to you is, why is blood entering from atria to ventricles? The very reason is because the atria are going to contract. So, when these atria contract, the blood enters down, both on the right side as well as on the left side, okay. So, the very first event that has happened is that there has been an atrial contraction, okay. So, because of this atrial contraction, the blood has gone from atria down to the ventricles. Now, what is happening next? The next event is that the blood is going into, okay, the blood is going into the pulmonary trunk, and on the left side, the blood is entering into the systemic aorta. So, that is happening because there has been contraction of the ventricles. So, the next event that happens is that there's going to be a ventricular contraction. Okay, so now after the atria has contracted and after the ventricles have contracted, now is a brief time when the heart is going to relax. So basically, when this heart is going to relax, this is actually the whole heart relaxing together. Hence, this third event after those two contractions, the next event will be called as the joint diastole, or you can say that it is a complete cardiac resting moment, okay. The complete cardiac is undergoing relaxation. So, let us now start with the events that are happening during each cardiac cycle, okay. All the events happening in one heartbeat is called as the cardiac cycle, and remember, the cardiac cycle is lasting for how long? It's lasting for 0.8 seconds. The very first event, remember, it was atrial contraction, and atrial contraction, another name that we have learned for contraction, it was called as atrial systole. So, we see here that atrial systole is one, or rather it is the first event included in the cardiac cycle. First is atrial systole. Next, what came? Remember the second event, it was called as ventricular systole. And after both these contractions have taken place, now it's time for the heart to relax. So now we will call this third event as the joint diastole, okay. Third event is known as the joint diastole. Now, let us see, when we're talking about the atrial systole, what happens here. Just like we spoke a little while back, atrial contraction takes place. And what happens? Which blood is going from which part of the heart to which part? From the right atrium. Which blood is found in right atrium? This atrium over here. Which blood is found there? It is all deoxygenated blood here. So, from the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood is being carried to the right ventricle. And why is that? Because the atria have contracted. Then, what happens on the left side of the heart? On the left side, the oxygenated blood is being carried from that left atrium to the left ventricle. Now, remember one thing, that while passing from atria to ventricles, they have to go through those two valves. The first valve on the right side would be the tricuspid valve. The next valve on the left side would be the bicuspid valve, or also known as the mitral valve, okay. So, this is all the events which were associated at atrial systole, that is atrial contraction. Atrial systole is lasting for only 0.1 second. So basically what happens here is, remember that pacemaker that we spoke about? What happens? The SA node, okay, generates an impulse. SA node is going to be generating an impulse, and that impulse is going to be traveling through the atria. And since the impulse travels through the atria, we see that the atria will undergo systole and the atria will then contract. Once the atria contracts, the blood is now entered into the ventricle. So now whose turn is it? After the SA node, the impulse now reaches at the level of the AV node and it passes all the way up to those fibers. If you remember, those fibers were called as Purkinje fibers. Okay, those are called as Purkinje fibers. Now, when the impulse reaches the level of the Purkinje fibers, it's going to create a ventricular contraction. And when we say that the ventricles are contracting, may I call this as ventricular systole. Now, what happens when the ventricles are contracting? Let's talk about one chamber after the other. First ventricle, this ventricle over here, the right sided one, it is filled with deoxygenated blood. That deoxygenated blood enters into the pulmonary trunk and it enters into the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so that deoxygenated blood, after entering into the pulmonary trunk and artery, is taken to the lungs. Okay, and on the other side, on the left side, the oxygenated blood is going to go from that left ventricle, enter into the aorta, and from the aorta it is going to be passing to all the different parts of the body, right? Remember one thing, now in between these two major blood vessels, there is a presence of a valve which is half moon shaped, and those valves, one over here and one over here, those valves are called as the semilunar valves. So, that blood is passing through the semilunar valves and going to go to the respective parts. So, first part, on the right side, from the right ventricle, which blood is it? It is the deoxygenated blood. From the right ventricle is going to enter into the pulmonary trunk. And then, from the left ventricle, the oxygenated blood is entering into the aorta. Before entering into the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, remember that the blood has to pass through the two valves which are called as the semilunar valves because they are half moon shaped valves. Okay. Now what has happened? We have completed the atrial systole. We have also completed the ventricular systole. After these two things take place, remember atrial systole lasted for 0.1 second. And remember, ventricular systole is going to be lasting for 0.3 seconds. So now, if you recollect, the whole cardiac cycle lasted for 0.8 seconds. Okay. Now, out of this 0.8 seconds, 0.4 seconds was involved in activities where there was atrial systole and there was ventricular systole. So, basically for 0.4 seconds, there has been contraction. Okay, 0.4 seconds the heart is contracting. Now let's see what is happening now in the remaining 0.4 seconds. So now after this ventricular systole, we have the next, that is the third event, which is called as joint diastole. First and foremost, joint because it is an activity happening both at atria and at the ventricles. Diastole indicates that there is a phase of relaxation. Okay, diastole always means relaxation. Alright, so now what is happening in joint diastole? Well, basically here both the atria and the ventricles are undergoing relaxation. Okay, now what happens here? It's not that the heart will just relax and nothing will happen. So while the heart muscles are relaxing, the heart is going to be empty, and that's why it takes that opportunity that it will allow blood to enter into it. So, if I am saying that blood is going to enter during this time, so now the atria are relaxing, the ventricles are relaxing, so why don't we use this time to fill that heart back with blood? Yes, when the blood is entering into the heart, which chambers do they enter into? They enter into the atria. Let's first talk about the right atrium. When we talk about the right atrium, how does blood enter into the right atrium and which blood enters? In the right atrium, remember, it was all deoxygenated blood, and deoxygenated blood enters in through first the superior vena cava, second the inferior vena cava, and third the coronary sinus. So, in the level of the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood is going to enter through three ways. First, superior, second, inferior vena cava, and third, through the coronary sinus. Okay. Next, when we talk about the left atrium, that is the left side of the heart, at the left side of the heart, remember, it is oxygenated blood which is being coming from the lungs. Okay, it comes from the lungs. Now, from the lungs, that oxygenated blood enters into the heart, through which are the blood vessels which is bringing that oxygenated blood? These blood vessels are what we call as the pulmonary veins. And how many pulmonary veins are there? Two pairs of them, or you can say that there are four pulmonary veins which is bringing oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Okay, so this is the way how the heart is using up the time that it is when it is relaxing, still the activities are going on. That is, when the heart is relaxing, it takes up or it uses up that time just to fill the heart back with blood. Okay, now remember one thing, that first we saw there was atrial systole, then we saw that there was ventricular systole. Those lasted for together cumulative time of 0.4 seconds. When we talk about the joint diastole, this takes up the remaining time of the cardiac cycle, and hence joint diastole is lasting for another 0.4 seconds. Okay. So we have here that when you understand the whole activities of the heart, if we club this in one whole cycle, okay, if you make one big cycle for all the activities, okay, let's make a small pie diagram, okay. Now in this circle, alright, okay, so now in this whole activities, what basically is happening? Let's just divide this into two parts, okay. The first half is indicating systole, okay. The first half is indicating systole, that is contraction. The second half is indicating diastole, that is relaxation, okay. And the whole cycle, if I am saying that this is the cardiac cycle, then in this cardiac cycle, 0.4 seconds is systole, okay, 0.4 seconds is diastole. That's why the whole cardiac cycle is of 0.8 seconds. Okay, now in this 0.8 seconds, we see that the first part over here, this part over here is going to be indicating 0.1 second, and that 0.1 second was what we called as, what was that part called as? Do you remember that part? This first activity over here, this first activity here was what we called as the atrial contraction, or we called it as the atrial systole, okay. So the very first event happening was called as the atrial systole. Alright, next event happening was that the ventricles were contracting. So let's indicate that over here, and this is going to be indicating complete ventricular contraction. Alright, when the ventricles are contracting, this is an event which is lasting for how long? This is an event which is lasting for another 0.3 seconds, and this is indicating ventricular systole. Okay, the third event would be that of the joint diastole, and the joint diastole is the event happening here. Completely, this is all relaxation activities happening, lasting for 0.4 seconds, okay, and this is the part where the heart is relaxing. So this is also called as joint diastole. Okay, now my question to you will be, okay, let us remove some of these markings here. I'll remove this marking over here. Okay, I will also remove this marking here, and I remove this marking over here. Okay, now my question to you is, if I am going to ask you that what is the time that the atria relax? Okay, my question to you is, how long does the atria relax? Yes, you know that the atria is contracting for 0.1 seconds, and immediately after the atria have contracted for 0.1 second, atria will start to relax. So after this 0.1 second, this is the contraction time. Okay, after the contraction, the atria will begin to relax. So atria are relaxing through this 0.3 seconds, and atria are also relaxing throughout the joint diastole. So we say that the atria are going to be relaxing for 0.3 plus 0.4 seconds, and that indicates that atria are relaxing for 0.7 seconds. Okay, what about if I ask you, how long do the ventricles relax? Okay, my next question is ventricular relaxation. How long is that going to be? Can you imagine that? Well, ventricles are relaxing throughout the time of joint diastole. But when the atria are contracting, at that time, the ventricles are still relaxing. So even throughout this 0.1 seconds, the ventricles will be relaxing. So ventricles are relaxing for 0.4 seconds of joint diastole and 0.1 second of atrial systole. So ventricles relax for a total amount of 0.5 seconds. Okay, I hope these two concepts were clear for you, that atria relax for 0.7 seconds and ventricles relax for 0.5 seconds. Together, if you're talking about when atria and ventricles both are relaxing at the same time, that is lasting only for 0.4 seconds. Okay, so this is the whole concept of the cardiac cycle, that is the events which are associated with one heartbeat. Okay, so children, today's lecture was all about the different circulatory systems in various animals. We also revised the topic of double circulation, and we had a briefer, or rather a deeper talk about the cardiac cycle. On Saturday, we have a small 10-mark MCQ test for this chapter. So do give that test, and we meet together again in next Tuesday for our further topics of this chapter. Until our next lecture, stay home, stay safe, take care, and go back and you can watch these videos again in order to prepare for your Saturday test. Alright, see you next week, and till then, take care kids. Bye-bye.